the lie that's quietly controlling your life. There is a version of you that people like, polite, agreeable, easy to deal with. That version knows exactly when to stay quiet, when to smile, when to nod, even when it disagrees. And the uncomfortable truth is, this version has been winning. It gets fewer conflicts, it avoids tension, it keeps things smooth, but there is a cost you've been ignoring. Every time you choose approval over honesty, something small is taken from you. Not all at once. Not enough to alarm you. Just enough to slowly reshape who you are. You start adjusting your opinions before you even speak. You hesitate before expressing something real. You measure your words not by truth, but by how they will be received. And without noticing, your life becomes a performance. What makes this dangerous is that it feels right. It feels like maturity. It feels like emotional intelligence. It feels like being a good person. But it is not. It is fear, refined and disguised as virtue. The Stoics understood something most people still avoid. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he reminds himself that the opinions of others are outside his control and therefore should not dictate his actions. Epictetus goes further and teaches that if you want to improve, you must be willing to be seen as foolish in the eyes of others. That idea is uncomfortable for a reason, because the moment you stop trying to be liked, you risk losing the very thing you've been using to feel safe. But what if that safety is an illusion? What if the need to be liked is not protecting you? What if it is the very thing holding you back? The next part will show you the exact moment this pattern begins and why most people never even realize it's happening. The moment you betrayed yourself without noticing. It did not happen in a dramatic moment. No argument, no clear decision, no visible turning point. It happened quietly. Someone said something you disagreed with and you stayed silent. You wanted to say no, but you said yes to avoid tension. You laughed at something that did not feel right just to keep the atmosphere comfortable. That was the moment. Not because of what you did, but because of what you taught yourself. You taught yourself that being accepted matters more than being honest. You trained your mind to associate authenticity with risk and approval with safety. And once that association is created, it starts repeating automatically. You no longer pause to decide. You adjust instantly. You filter your thoughts before they even become words. You begin anticipating reactions instead of expressing truth. This is how self-betrayal becomes a habit. It feels small in the beginning, almost insignificant. But over time, these moments accumulate, and something subtle begins to disappear. Your voice becomes weaker, your presence becomes softer, your identity becomes negotiable. Seneca warned about this in his letters when he wrote that we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The fear of rejection feels real, but most of the time it never even happens, yet you act as if it already has. So you compromise, not because you are weak, but because you have been conditioned. The danger is not that you changed once. The danger is that you stop noticing when you do it, and if you cannot see the moment you betray yourself, you cannot stop it. The next part will reveal something even deeper, not just when this started, but how you slowly built a version of yourself that exists only to be accepted. The social mask you forgot you were wearing. At some point, adapting stopped being a choice and became your default. You learned what works, what gets approval, what avoids tension, so you repeated it. A different tone with different people, a different opinion depending on the room, a controlled version of yourself that feels safe, predictable, acceptable. And over time, something subtle happened. You stopped noticing the difference between who you are and who you present. The mask became efficient, automatic, invisible. You are not pretending in a conscious way. That would be easier to detect. You are adjusting in real time without awareness, shaping yourself to fit expectations before they are even spoken. This is why it feels natural. But natural does not mean true. Musonius Rufus taught that a person should live in accordance with their nature, not according to the approval of the crowd. Yet the more you depend on being liked, the further you move away from that nature. Because a mask cannot be stable, it requires constant monitoring, constant correction, constant anticipation, and that creates a quiet tension inside you. You begin to feel drained after social interactions, even when nothing went wrong. You replay conversations in your head, analyzing how you were perceived. You become hyper-aware of reactions, tones, expressions. Not because you are thoughtful, because you are managing an image. The problem is not that you wear a mask. Everyone does at times. The problem is that you forgot you are wearing one. And when that happens, you lose access to something essential: clarity. Because if you are always adapting, you never fully see what you actually think, want, or believe. The next part will expose a truth that most people resist. What you call kindness may not be kindness at all, and understanding this changes everything. Why being nice is often a hidden strategy, not a virtue. You were taught that being nice is always the right thing to do. Be agreeable, be understanding, avoid conflict. And for a while it feels like strength. People appreciate you, you avoid friction, you maintain harmony. But look closer. How many times were you being nice because you truly wanted to? And how many times were you being nice because you were afraid of the outcome if you were not? That distinction changes everything. Because when kindness is real, it is free. It does not expect approval. It does not fear rejection. But when kindness is driven by fear, it becomes a strategy, a way to stay safe, a way to control how others see you, a way to avoid discomfort. Epictetus taught that no person is free who is not master of themselves. If your behavior depends on how others might react, then your actions are not guided by values, but by fear. And fear always disguises itself well. It tells you that you are being mature. It tells you that you are being emotionally intelligent. It tells you that avoiding conflict is wisdom. But in reality, you are negotiating your identity. You say what is acceptable instead of what is true. You agree to keep the peace instead of standing your ground. You suppress what you feel to maintain a version of yourself that others approve of. This is not kindness. This is self-abandonment with good manners. Seneca warned that we should not shape ourselves according to what pleases others, but according to what is right. Because the moment your actions are designed to please, you lose alignment with your own judgment. And that creates a deeper problem. You start losing respect for yourself, not all at once, but enough to feel it. A subtle discomfort, a quiet frustration, a sense that something is off, even when everything seems fine. The next part will reveal something even more unsettling. Every interaction you have is shaping you in ways you do not realize, and most of it is happening without your awareness. The silent negotiations happening in every interaction. Every conversation you have comes with a hidden layer, not the words being spoken, but the adjustments happening underneath. You enter a room and immediately start calculating. What tone should I use? How direct can I be? What part of myself is safe to show here? None of this feels deliberate. It happens fast, automatic, almost invisible, but it is there. You soften statements to avoid friction. You hold back opinions that might create tension. You adjust your energy depending on who is in front of you. These are negotiations, not with others but with yourself. How much truth can I afford to express? How much of me needs to be edited to maintain approval? And the more you repeat this pattern, the more refined it becomes. You get better at reading reactions, better at anticipating discomfort, better at shaping yourself in real time. It starts to feel like social intelligence, but there is a cost. Because every adjustment, no matter how small, moves you slightly away from who you are. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 30, that a person must stand straight, not be held straight by others. Yet these constant internal negotiations do the opposite. They teach you to rely on external reactions to guide internal behavior. You are no longer expressing, you are calibrating, and calibration never stops. Even after the conversation ends, it continues. You replay what you said. You analyze how it was received. You imagine what you could have done differently, not to grow, but to avoid future rejection. This is the trap. Because the more you negotiate yourself in small moments, the harder it becomes to recognize when you are no longer being real at all. The next part will confront a deeper illusion. You believe approval is something people give you, but the truth is far more unsettling. Approval is not given, it is projected. You believe people decide who you are, that they observe you, analyze you, and then reach a clear conclusion about your value. But that is not what actually happens. People do not see you as you are. They see you through themselves, their mood, their past experiences, their insecurities, their expectations. All of it shapes how they interpret you. The same behavior can make one person admire you and another reject you. The same words can be seen as confident or arrogant, depending on who is listening. So what are you really trying to control? Not reality. Perception. And perception is unstable. Seneca warned that reputation lives in the minds of others, not in truth. That means it is constantly shifting, constantly being rewritten without your consent. Yet you keep adjusting yourself as if there were a fixed standard to meet, as if there were a correct version of you that everyone would approve. There is not. You are trying to solve a problem that has no stable solution, because approval is not something people objectively give. It is something they project based on their own internal state. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous. You start believing that if you just behave the right way, you will be accepted by everyone. So you refine, you adjust, you filter, you try to eliminate anything that could be judged negatively. But the more you do this, the more disconnected you become from something essential: your own judgment. Epictetus taught that the only thing truly in your control is your own choice, your own response, your own character. The moment you prioritize how you are seen over what you believe, you hand that control away. And once that happens, you are no longer living. You are being interpreted. The next part will show the hidden price of this pattern, not in theory, but in what it does to your mind, your energy, and your sense of self over time. The emotional tax of trying to be liked. You do not notice it at first. There is no single moment where everything collapses, no clear signal telling you something is wrong. Just a gradual weight that starts building. You leave conversations feeling drained, even when nothing negative happened. You replay interactions in your mind, searching for mistakes that may not exist. You feel tension before speaking, as if every word needs to be carefully approved. This is the cost, not visible, not dramatic, but constant. Every time you filter yourself, your brain stays active longer than it should. Every time you anticipate judgment, your body prepares for a threat that is not real. Every time you adjust your behavior, you create internal friction. That friction accumulates, and over time, it turns into something heavier. Mental fatigue, social anxiety, emotional exhaustion. You begin to associate people with pressure instead of connection, because you are not just interacting, you are performing. Musonius Rufus taught that a person should live simply and in alignment with their nature. But when you are constantly trying to be liked, nothing about your behavior is simple. Everything is calculated, everything is monitored, everything is slightly forced, and your mind knows it. That is why you feel tired even when things go well, because maintaining an image requires more energy than being real. The worst part is that you adapt to this. You start believing this level of tension is normal. You accept the exhaustion as part of social life. You convince yourself that this is just how things are. But it is not. It is the price you are paying for approval. And like any tax, the more you earn in acceptance, the more you owe in energy. The next part will reveal something even more unsettling. This need to be liked does not just drain you, it also makes you predictable. And that has consequences most people never consider: the hidden link between approval and control. There is something you may not have considered. The more you need to be liked, the easier you are to control. Not because people are always trying to manipulate you consciously, but because your behavior becomes predictable. If someone knows you avoid conflict, they push a little more. If someone sees you hesitate to say no, they ask again. If someone notices you value approval, they reward you with it when you comply. And without realizing it, you respond. You adjust. You agree. You tolerate more than you should. Not because you want to, but because the alternative feels uncomfortable. This is how control works. It does not require force. It only requires understanding your patterns. Epictetus taught that whoever can anger you becomes your master. The same principle applies here. Whoever can grant or withdraw approval from you gains influence over your actions. Because you are no longer acting from choice, you are reacting to avoid losing something. And that changes everything. Your decisions become softer. Your boundaries become negotiable. Your standards become flexible depending on who is in front of you. You start giving more than you should, accepting less than you deserve, staying silent when something needs to be said, all to maintain a sense of acceptance. But acceptance gained this way is fragile, because it is not based on who you are, it is based on how well you adapt. Seneca warned that when you depend on external things, you place your peace in unstable hands. Approval is one of the most unstable things you can rely on, and yet the more you depend on it, the more influence others have over you. This is the real cost, not just exhaustion, loss of autonomy. The next part will expose a consequence that most people overlook. When you adapt too much, something unexpected happens. You do not just lose control, you begin to disappear. When you adapt too much, you become invisible. At first, adapting feels like an advantage. You read the room well, you avoid unnecessary conflict, you fit in almost anywhere. People describe you as easy to be around. But over time, something shifts. You are accepted, but not remembered. Included, but not chosen. Present, but not impactful. Because when you adapt too much, there is nothing solid for people to connect with. Your edges disappear. Your opinions soften. Your presence becomes neutral, and neutrality feels safe, but it carries a hidden cost. It makes you invisible. Not physically, psychologically. People do not resist you, but they do not feel you either. They do not challenge you, but they do not respect you deeply. They do not reject you, but they do not fully see you. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations, Book 3, Paragraph 4, that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When your thoughts are constantly adjusted to match others, your identity loses its original color. You become a reflection, not a source. And reflections are easy to overlook. This is why you may feel something is missing, even when everything seems socially fine, because connection requires something real to attach to. And if you are always adapting, there is nothing stable for others to recognize, so they move on. Not because you are not enough, but because they never truly experienced you. The next part will take you deeper into the root of this behavior. It is not just about approval. It is about something far more primal that has been guiding your actions from the beginning. The fear of rejection is actually fear of isolation. You think you are afraid of being disliked, but that is not the real fear. Being disliked is uncomfortable but temporary. What your mind is actually trying to avoid is something deeper. Isolation, being excluded, being left out, being alone without support. This fear is not random. For most of human history, being rejected by the group meant danger. It meant losing protection, resources, and connection. So your brain adapted. It learned to treat social disapproval as a threat. It learned to push you toward behaviors that increase acceptance. It learned to keep you close to the group, even at a personal cost. And that system still runs today, even though your survival no longer depends on it. This is why the reaction feels so intense. A simple disagreement can feel like a risk. A negative opinion can feel like a warning. A moment of disapproval can trigger a need to correct yourself immediately, not because the situation is dangerous, but because your brain interprets it that way. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by things, but by the views we take of them. The event is small, but your interpretation amplifies it. So you adjust, you avoid, you soften, you comply, all to maintain connection. But here is the problem. When you constantly act to avoid isolation, you create a different kind of distance. You are physically present, but psychologically absent. You are included, but not fully known. You are connected, but not understood. Because real connection requires risk. It requires showing something that can be rejected. And if you remove that risk completely, you also remove the possibility of being truly seen. The next part will challenge a belief that reinforces this entire pattern. You think people are constantly judging you, but the reality is far less dramatic and far more liberating. The illusion that everyone is thinking about you. You walk into a room and feel watched, not literally, but internally. You become aware of your posture, your tone, your words. You assume people are noticing, evaluating, judging, forming opinions about you in real time. So you adjust. You speak more carefully. You hold back certain thoughts. You try to present the version of yourself that will be received well. But here is the truth most people avoid. They are not thinking about you as much as you think. They are thinking about themselves, their own insecurities, their own concerns, their own image. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations, Book 7, paragraph 21, that people are too occupied with their own lives to be constantly focused on others. This is not indifference, it is reality. Everyone is managing their own internal world, which means something important. The judgment you are trying to avoid is often minimal, fleeting, or imagined. Yet you treat it as if it were constant and severe. You build your behavior around a spotlight that is not even there. This creates a strange loop. You monitor yourself because you believe others are watching. Others are not watching because they are monitoring themselves, and everyone ends up trapped in their own projection. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is where that suffering lives, in assumptions, in interpretations, in mental scenarios that never fully happen. But your body reacts as if they do, so you keep adjusting, not to real judgment, but to imagined attention. And this reinforces the need to be liked, because if you believe you are constantly being evaluated, you feel the need to constantly perform. The next part will expose the long-term consequence of this pattern, not just what you feel, but what you lose by avoiding discomfort at all costs. The cost of avoiding discomfort at all costs. You have trained yourself to avoid tension, to keep things smooth, to prevent awkwardness, to escape any situation where you might feel exposed. And at first it seems like the smart move. You avoid arguments, you reduce friction, you keep relationships stable. But look deeper. Every time you avoid discomfort, you also avoid something else. Growth. Because growth rarely feels safe. It feels uncertain. It feels risky. It feels like saying something you are not sure will be accepted. So when you remove discomfort from your life, you also remove the conditions that force you to evolve. You stay within what is accepted. You repeat what is familiar. You operate inside boundaries defined by others. And slowly, your world becomes smaller. Fewer risks, fewer opportunities, fewer moments where you truly test yourself. Musonius Rufus taught that hardship and challenge are necessary for strengthening character. Without them, a person becomes fragile, dependent on ease. That fragility shows up in subtle ways. You hesitate more. You second-guess simple decisions. You feel pressure in situations that require directness, not because you are incapable, but because you have avoided the very experiences that would have built that strength. And there is another cost: respect, not just from others, but from yourself. Because every time you avoid what is difficult but necessary, you reinforce a message internally that your comfort matters more than your truth. And over time, that message shapes your identity. You become someone who retreats instead of someone who stands. The next part will introduce a shift that changes everything, not by making you harder or colder, but by changing where your strength comes from. The Stoic shift, indifference as inner power. There is a moment where everything changes, not on the outside, not in how people treat you, but in what you stop needing. You stop needing approval to act. You stop needing agreement to feel certain. You stop needing acceptance to move forward. This is not arrogance, this is clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 30, that a person must stand upright, not be held upright by others. That means your direction cannot depend on how you are received, because the moment it does, you are no longer stable, you are reactive. Epictetus taught that some things are within your control and others are not. Your actions, your choices, your values, those belong to you. Opinions, reactions, judgments, those never did. This is where indifference becomes power. Not indifference to people, not indifference to relationships, indifference to what you cannot control. When you internalize this, something shifts. You no longer speak to be approved. You speak because it is true. You no longer act to be accepted. You act because it is aligned. You no longer adjust to avoid judgment. You accept that judgment will happen anyway, and this creates a new kind of presence. Calm, direct, unforced. Seneca warned that when a person depends on external validation, Their peace is always at risk. But when your standard comes from within, your stability no longer fluctuates with other people. This does not make you distant, it makes you grounded, because now your behavior is not a reaction to the room. It is an expression of who you are regardless of the room. The next part will take this principle out of theory and into practice, because understanding this shift is one thing, but living it requires a skill most people avoid developing, the skill of disappointing people without losing yourself. There is a skill most people avoid developing, not because it is complex, but because it feels uncomfortable at first. The ability to disappoint others. You have been trained to prevent that at all costs, to keep expectations intact, to avoid letting people down. So you say yes when you mean no. You agree when you disagree. You stay silent when something needs to be said, not because you do not know what is right, but because you fear the reaction. Disappointment feels like rejection, and rejection feels like loss, so you avoid it. But here is the shift. Disappointing others is not the same as betraying them. Sometimes it is the only way to stop betraying yourself. Epictetus taught that if you want to live a life of integrity, you must be willing to be misunderstood. That includes moments where people will not agree with your choices, and that is where most people retreat. They explain too much. They justify too much. They soften their decisions to make them more acceptable. But the more you try to reduce the discomfort of others, the more you increase your own. This skill requires something different. Clarity without aggression, directness without guilt, calm without apology. You say no without over-explaining. You hold your position without needing validation. You allow others to react without trying to control their response. At first, it feels unnatural because you are breaking a pattern. But over time, something stabilizes. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You stop managing how others feel about your choices. You start acting from alignment instead of fear. Musonius Rufus emphasized that a good life is built on consistent actions guided by reason, not by the shifting opinions of others. This is where that principle becomes real, not in theory, in moments where it would be easier to comply. The next part will reveal what happens when you develop this skill consistently, how your presence changes, and why people begin to treat you differently without you forcing it. Becoming hard to manipulate, easy to respect. Something shifts the moment you stop needing approval. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. People start to feel it. You no longer rush to agree. You no longer bend to avoid tension. You no longer explain yourself just to be accepted. And because of that, your behavior becomes less predictable. That is what changes everything. When you needed to be liked, your patterns were easy to read. Avoid conflict, seek harmony, maintain approval. Now those patterns are gone. You still listen, you still respect others, but you are no longer controlled by their reactions. This creates a different kind of presence. You speak with intention, not hesitation. You act with clarity, not negotiation. You respond, but you do not adapt yourself to fit every expectation, and people notice. Not because you demand attention, but because you are no longer trying to earn it. Seneca wrote that the wise person is content with themselves, and that self-sufficiency is what makes someone unshakable. When you no longer depend on external validation, your actions become consistent. Consistency builds trust, and trust creates respect. This is why something paradoxical happens. When you stop trying to be liked, people begin to value your presence more. Not everyone. Some will feel uncomfortable, some will resist, some will distance themselves, but the ones who stay respond differently. They take your words more seriously, they recognize your boundaries, they engage with you without trying to reshape you. Because you are no longer signaling that you can be adjusted. You are signaling that you are defined. And defined people are harder to manipulate, not because they resist everything, but because they choose consciously. The next part will bring everything together, not as an idea, but as a decision that changes the day you no longer need permission to exist. There is a moment that does not look important from the outside. No applause, no announcement, no visible shift. But internally, everything changes. You stop asking for permission, not out loud, but in the way you think. You no longer wait for approval before speaking. You no longer adjust your truth to make it easier to accept. You no longer measure your actions based on how they will be received. You act, not recklessly, not emotionally, but deliberately. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 5, Paragraph 1, that at dawn, when you struggle to get out of bed, remind yourself that you are rising to do the work of a human being. Not to please others, but to fulfill your role according to your nature. That is the shift. You stop living to be accepted. You start living to be aligned. And this does not make your life easier. You will face resistance. You will be misunderstood. You will disappoint people who expected a different version of you. But something more important replaces that. Stability. Because now your actions come from a place that does not fluctuate. Your values, your judgment, your clarity. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and it is achieved by detaching from what is not in your control. Approval was never in your control. Now you see it. And because you see it, you stop chasing it. This is where most people hesitate. They understand the idea, but they do not act on it, because letting go of approval feels like stepping into uncertainty. But what you gain is not uncertainty. It is ownership. You own your decisions. You own your voice. You own your direction. No more silent negotiations, no more invisible compromises, no more living through the expectations of others. Just one question remains. If you no longer need permission to exist, who do you become now?